Representative Landry on House Bill 67.
Thank you, members of the committee. And before I start, there is a large crowd here today, and I appreciate everyone's interest in it. And I just wanted the crowd to know that we do have quite a few advocates here to testify on behalf of the bill. So if you are here in capacity as a lobbyist or just to watch, I would appreciate if you would respectfully recognize that there are some people here to testify, and I think the committee would benefit if they were in the room so that testimony does not become repetitive. No one moved. Anyway, thank you everyone for being here today. This is the first time a bill like this has been introduced, not just in our state, but to my understanding, any state legislature in the country. This bill would decriminalize prostitution. You'll hear me and a lot of the people speaking in support use the words prostitution and sex work interchangeably. Sex work is a more encompassing term that people who engage in this prefer. Prostitution has become somewhat of a insult over the years. However, it is the word that is used in Louisiana law, so we will use both of them. What this bill would do is basically just stop arresting people over the age of 18 who engage in consensual sexual behavior, sexual activities, for money. This does not legalize, which is a very different story. Y'all have heard the marijuana bills recently. Y'all know there's a difference between decriminalizing marijuana, which you just stop arresting people for it, versus legalizing, which is licensing, taxing, money, that sort of thing. This would simply decriminalize this. This bill came from over a year ago when I was elected. I met with a group called Women with a Vision in New Orleans. They've been around for over 30 years. They're a group of women, mostly led by Black women, who have worked with the community in New Orleans for a long time. They work with people with drug addictions. They work with people who live and work on the street. They work with people who are forgotten by many of us in the community, and they do very good work, and they show a compassion that I wish most of us were able to show for others. But I met with them over a year ago, and I said, you know, what would y'all want? If you had something that you could do in our legislature, something that you wanted to tell my colleagues, what would you do? And we had a whole list of items ranging from, you know, drug issues to policing to expungements, all kinds of items. And finally we got to decriminalizing sex work, and they said this would be the #1 thing that would change the lives of the people who we work with. The problem with criminalizing consensual behavior is the people involved in it can't go to law enforcement themselves when they are the victims of a crime. They can't report often when they see someone else who's the victim of a crime. These are people who engage in this behavior by choice. And I want to touch on that because you're going to hear a lot about trafficking over and over again today. Trafficking is a crime. Trafficking is forcing someone to do something against their will. It is a crime. It is always a crime. It is a federal crime. It is a state crime. It is forcing someone to do something against their will. That is not what this is about. This is consensual behavior between people who are over 18 years old. I have a lot of people here who are going to speak from their personal experiences, and I please ask that you and the staff and the audience give them respect for being here. These are often people who I would say most of us do not come into contact with on a daily basis. They have never, ever had their voices heard in this building. I think it is important, and I'm proud of them for coming here today. They've worked hard the past year to put this together. They live in this state too. They work here. One of them just bought a new home here. They pay taxes here, and they have every right to be heard here. And I ask that everyone give them the same respect that you gave to everyone who came here today. We also have a few people here who are going to talk about this from a legal and policing angle and talk about what it actually means when someone is arrested for a consensual act like this. We're going to have people talk from one person at least who is on the Greater, I might have the name wrong, the Greater New Orleans Trafficking Commission, to talk about the big difference between trafficking and consensual behavior. But most of all, we have people here to tell their own story. They live here. They think that this is a problem. They have a solution to it, and I ask that you take it seriously. I can answer some questions, but there are a handful of people here who have worked in this arena for many, many years who can give probably a lot more detailed explanation than I can. But I have given by now probably 25 interviews on this, so I can try to answer some questions for now, but I hope that you give a lot of credence and respect to the people who come after me.
Thank you, Representative Landry. We will get to the testimony. I see these two ladies behind you. We have, I know I had some names, Lakeisha Lewis. Why don't you two just come up now? We were trying to find the cards. Yep.
Good morning, committee members. We want to thank you first for holding this hearing. My name is Lakeisha Harris. I am the Director of Reproductive Health and Justice at Women with a Vision. I am a taxpayer in the state of Louisiana and a homeowner. This is where I've chosen to make my home. And most importantly, I am a second-generation sex worker, former sex worker. Sex work allowed me the ability to take care of my 6 children, to raise them, send some of them to school, higher education. We at Women with a Vision define sex work as the consensual transactional labor between 2 consenting adults. We are not talking about sex trafficking. What we are talking about is the exchange of goods, services, housing, because people need their rent paid, especially in a pandemic. We have had to rethink of ways in which people survive during this time. And these are the ways that in which sex workers have had to survive all of their lives. Unfortunately, for sex workers and many trying to survive, that labor has been heavily policed. Policed for nothing more than trying to put food on the table, consenting. Their labor scrutinized in the community, condemned as morally wrong, and stigmatized. And that stigmatization, quite honestly, have put them at risk in the community for violence and abuse, not just by community members, but also by police who are supposed to protect and serve. And they have absolutely never protected and served sex workers. It is a dire circumstance that we find ourselves facing day in and day out as service providers in the city who also try to connect people to housing, but once they're criminalized, they have a record. And when you have a record, many of you know, it's hard to get housing. And because people don't have housing, and because they cannot use their money that they earn to substantiate their living, they can't even buy a house as a process to wealth or obtaining wealth and generational wealth. Many are shut out of services. And this is why we come before you today to decriminalize sex work, because what people deserve and what we have recognized, especially in the pandemic, is people deserve resources to be kept and held in their community, to not be stigmatized and shamed, and most importantly, not be placed in the carceral systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harris.
Good morning, members of the Committee on the Administration of Criminal Justice. Unfortunately, I'm not as good a public speaker as my colleague Lakeisha Harris, so I'll be reading a prepared statement. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my testimony in support of House Bill 67. My name is Christine Lowbry, and I am a program director at Women with a Vision, a community-based organization with the mission to improve the lives of marginalized women, their families, and their communities by addressing the social conditions that hinder their health and well-being. At Women with a Vision, we employ a harm reduction framework in our advocacy, health education, and culturally affirming supportive services. I have worked in the public health sector. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm a former sex worker. My professional experiences have informed my approach to the call for the decriminalization of sex work. During my tenure at Women with a Vision, I have assisted in developing and managing a diversion program housed in the Orleans Parish Municipal Court for people charged with sex work-related offenses. Throughout my work, I have learned firsthand who is criminalized in our state for these offenses. The people who are policed and prosecuted for sex work-related offenses are overwhelmingly people who are poor, women, Black, transgender, unhoused, or unstably housed. I've also learned that the same populations who are criminalized for sex work experience significantly higher rates of being criminalized as survivors of sex and labor trafficking, gender-based violence, and sexual violence. This fact is appallingly overlooked by those who create laws to criminalize consensual sex work in their efforts to reduce sex trafficking. The people who are criminalized for sex work-related offenses while enduring the harms of violence and coercion are not merely collateral damage in the anti-trafficking movement. They are our neighbors and our community members, but they do not receive equal protections under our laws. So the question is, why criminalize the labor of consenting adults when we know that survivors of trafficking and violence are ensnared in the same net? If we know that prohibition drives exploitation and blocks access to trauma-informed resources, why do we continue to criminalize consensual acts between adults? There are federal and state laws in place that prohibit sex and labor trafficking. These laws carry severe penalties for anyone who engages in, profits from, or entices a minor under the age of 18 into commercial sexual activity, regardless of force, fraud, or coercion. House Bill 67 will not change these laws, but it will strengthen the ability to enforce them. The solutions that we employ must match the problems that we claim we're fighting. And as we've learned, the criminalization of sex work does not decrease the risk of sex trafficking. Multiple reports have demonstrated that criminalizing sex work actually increases the risk of vulnerability to sex trafficking. Criminalizing sex work also puts sex workers at an increased risk of housing and employment discrimination, physical and sexual violence, and poor health outcomes by blocking access to needed resources. In conversations with people who do not support sex workers or the decriminalization of sex work, what we hear most often is there a lack of approval for the work. Statements such as, "you're selling your body," "you're being exploited," are at the forefront. That they know better than the adults engaging in this labor what's best for them. Is there a rationale for wanting to imprison people for choosing this work? And the only way to help them is to arrest them. It's fine that people do not approve, but that does not mean this labor should be criminalized. There are many jobs that people in Louisiana choose to labor in that I think are harmful, dangerous, or involve serious risk. I think about our offshore workers risking their lives to make a good living. I think about our healthcare professionals, service industry workers, and day laborers putting themselves at risk to earn a living in the middle of a pandemic. Our young people who join the armed forces, potentially risking their lives so that they can create a better life for their family, pay for school, and an attempt to escape generational poverty. I want safer working conditions for all of us. I want for no one to have to choose a job or profession because it is the only way that they can sustain themselves and their families. But that's not the world we live in. In Louisiana, where poverty rates that continue to lead the nation, with more than half of Louisiana's families living below the poverty line or are considered working poor, with deep wounds caused by mass incarceration across the state that prevent people from securing employment, education, and housing, so many of Louisiana's residents are left to choose their field of labor based on what's accessible, as well as what's best for them and their families. It is their right to choose their labor. It is also their right to have access to labor protections and safe working conditions. It is their right to labor free of fear of criminalization, because ultimately, no one should be put in jail for consensual labor that harms no one. For these reasons, I ask you to vote in favor of House Bill 67. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
We don't have any questions at this time. Next up, Anaya Robinson, ACLU of Louisiana, and Meg Garvey, Louisiana Criminal Defense Lawyers. Ms. Garb, who's going first?
I guess I am.
Okay.
Megan Garvey, here on behalf of Louisiana Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers in favor of House Bill 67. I'm here for a few different reasons, and I can speak a little bit from my own experience, but I will say that the current law as it stands we spend a lot of money prosecuting prostitution, prosecuting consensual acts between adults. We spend a lot of money and resources essentially monitoring vices. And so in many ways, this conversation is a lot like the conversation about marijuana and allowing consenting adults to choose what they want to do and not just mandating morality. And I do often come before this committee and make fiscal arguments, but ultimately in the long run, people are more important than money. And so I want to be clear that my motivation is not just fiscal. There is a human aspect to this. I have been a criminal defense attorney for about 15 years, and I've represented lots of women, and I've represented women who have been charged with violating the current laws that we have about prostitution. And I have seen women who have been afraid to get help, women who have been discouraged from seeking out social services that might otherwise be available to them or that they need because they are afraid of the consequences that will befall them in the criminal justice system. I have also seen instances where FBI agents and other members of law enforcement who, and this was years ago, and I think it's improving a little bit, but I still think there's a ways to go. The way that they have approached people in an effort to try to get information from them about actual trafficking, so actual crimes where people were being harmed, they leaned very heavily on threatening them with prosecution. And the result of that was that they didn't get the information that was helpful to actually going after people who were harming people because they shut people down and they alienated them and they made them feel disrespected and less than human. I have seen many elaborate sting operations with multiple agents, hotel rooms, setting up all of these, dates, etc. Once again, with adults. This bill does not deal with children, and the human resources and the money behind that could have otherwise gone to trying to investigate or prevent violent crime or child abuse or things where people were actually being harmed. It's just a waste. It's a distraction. The current law is really more about mandating morality than it is about protecting people and keeping people safe. Representative Landry made clear this is not something that legalizes enslaving people or trafficking people. And certainly I would not be in favor of that. But there's nothing in the current law that really is led by a desire to protect public safety. It's all about going after vice. And for that reason, I think the time has come to examine this and change this law. And I would ask that you move the bill favorably out of the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Garvey. Ms. Robinson.
Good morning, Chairman James and members of the committee. My name is Anaya Robinson, and I'm a lawyer and an advocacy strategist at the ACLU of Louisiana. And I'm here to voice our organization's support for House Bill 67. In 1975, the ACLU made decriminalization of sex work an official board policy. And as a civil liberties organization, we believe that a government should not be telling consenting adults who they can have sex with and on what terms. Just as important, we recognize that women of color and LGBT plus people make up the majority of sex workers. And it's these very communities that remain disproportionately policed, stigmatized, and harmed by laws that neither ensure the safety of consenting adults or the community. An arrest on charges of sex work can result in life-changing consequences that last long past the end of a sentence. A criminal record can prevent you from accessing an accurate ID, jobs, housing, healthcare, and other services. And employer background check policies and restrictions on licenses make it next to impossible for people to change careers. And in addition, criminal convictions for sex work-related offenses have been used as the basis to arbitrarily rearrest people and to remove parental custody. In addition to blocking employment opportunities, the fines and fees and bail and lost time associated with incarceration and pretrial detention can place those already pushed to the margins of society in positions of vulnerability. Sex workers often tell us that sex work is not inherently violent. It's the criminalization that places them at greatest risk. The need to avoid arrest of both sex workers and their clients means that street-based workers have to move to isolated areas that aren't as visible to law enforcement. And this is unfortunately the place where violence is more prevalent. Fear of arrest, it limits the time and methods that sex workers can use to conduct safety screenings. And we know that the stigma of sex work is fueled by criminalization. Decriminalization of
30
sex
seconds.
work would decrease isolation and risk of exploitation for the seller and allow buyers to more ethically purchase. So, because decriminalization would recognize the right of all people to privacy and freedom, and because we want to protect those who are already pushed to the margins of society, we as an organization ask that you vote favorably on HB 67. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Next up, Andrew Lewis and I'm not going to butcher this last name, Amira.
Good morning. She said she would like me to go first. Okay. That's okay. Okay. I just want to make sure everybody knew I asked.
And you can see.
And yeah,
there
exactly.
you go.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Andrew Lewis, and I live in New Orleans with my wife and children. I helped establish the Greater New Orleans.
Bring the mic closer.
Closer?
Yeah,
Okay.
there you
Sorry
go.
about that. My name is Andrew Lewis, and I live in New Orleans with my wife and children. I helped establish the Greater New Orleans Human Trafficking Task Force in 2015. And I'm a strong supporter of HB 67 and the efforts to decriminalize sex work. I would like to believe that every person in this room is against forced labor, exploitation, and sexual assault, and that every person in this room wants to end human trafficking. But intentions are not as important as impact. Many well-intentioned anti-trafficking efforts end up harming the people they're trying to protect. As a former task force coordinator, part of my job was to collect data on human trafficking in our region and report it back to the Department of Justice to understand where we are with trafficking. Towards that end, I was invited to observe a joint sting operation between Jefferson Parish Sheriff's Office, Louisiana State Patrol, and FBI. What I saw was a standard operation, and it was deeply troubling. Agents, pretending to be clients, set up dates with sex workers. When a sex worker arrived to the hotel room, they would be arrested and forced into another cold room, often with very little clothing, and interviewed. The same agent that handcuffed them would then ask them if they had been trafficked. And no matter their response, they were arrested and booked. At the end of the night, those arrests were reported back to me as prospective victims of human trafficking, even when there was no evidence of forced fraud or coercion. This method of data collection and investigation is morally wrong, violent, and harmful, and leads to an inaccurate picture of what's really going on with forced labor in our area. You will likely hear those opposed to this bill use this misleading data when they say in 2020 in Louisiana, there were 927 prospective or confirmed victims of human trafficking. Many organizations report human trafficking based on subjective definitions. If a nonprofit or law enforcement agency believes that all sex work is trafficking, they'll report it to DCSF as such. This inaccurate information might increase their funding, but it leads to a reduction of funding and attention for our fight to end actual human trafficking. Let me be clear, human trafficking does occur, and likely more than we know. But because we are spending a majority of our time and money on criminalizing consensual adult sex work, we're not able to help those being actually forced to work in the construction, agriculture, and yes, sex work industries in Louisiana. As I said before, I would like to believe that every person in this room is against forced labor, against sexual assault, and against exploitation. This bill would help us reduce those things by creating a community where sex workers feel safe enough to report actual human trafficking to law enforcement without the fear of being threatened, harmed, or harassed. I urge you to pass HB 67 through this committee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm curious about this thing. How many folks were arrested?
In this particular night, during the time of my tenure, there was probably 20 different sting operations that I was observed. This particular night, there was 10 to 13, I believe. And they were all adults.
You were invited because of your work with sex trafficking?
Because I was a task force coordinator, yeah, and they wanted me to see how the operations work. The mentality was, we are doing this for their sake. The only way that we can actually go after trafficking is if we arrest everybody and then interview them and see who's being trafficked. It's a failed approach. It's not trauma informed. It's not survivor centered, and it's still being used to try to say sex trafficking is occurring. What happens is those numbers get reported as prospective human trafficking victims, and we have a lot of fear mongering going along that sends the money to those who are working to combat that. There are a lot of good agencies doing a lot of good work, but we need to really question the data.
Thank you, Andrew. That's interesting, troubling. Go ahead. I won't. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Amira Barakat Albaladi, and I live in New Orleans. Thank you, committee members, for your time and attention. A lot of people I love are sex workers, and I'm here today to advocate for us and myself. I am the founder of Heaven on Earth, a supportive spiritual community for sex workers and survivors. After healing myself from sexual trauma, I created a platform for other sex workers to do the same thing and support each other. Because we are criminalized, we don't have access to the support we need to heal after we are violated at work, in intimate relationships, or other spaces. So we have had to create it for ourselves out of necessity. I know firsthand because this is my story. When I was raped by a man I left the strip club with, there was no one I could call for help. My friend and coworker had introduced him to me after I confided in her that I hadn't met my goal that night and I needed more money to pay my bills. She pointed out the nice-looking, handsome man in a suit and said, he's still got money and he wants to hang out after the club, but I'm tired and I'm ready to go home. It was against the rules to leave with customers, so I met up with him at a nearby gas station. I was leaving my legal sex work job, stripping, to do illegal sex work, known as escorting or full-service sex work. It's basically the same sexually free behavior that millions of consenting adults engage in every day. But because I was getting paid for it, it was an illegal act. I'm only speaking publicly about it now because the statute of limitations has passed. He raped me because he knew he could get away with it. I was willing to consensually have sex with him, but it became rape when he removed the condom and forcibly held me down so I couldn't get away from him as he raped me unprotected. After he raped me, I just had to deal with it myself because I already knew I wouldn't be believed anyway. And if I went to a hospital or a police station for help, I would be criminalized and possibly arrested. I couldn't deal with any more trauma that night, so I just went home in shock. I had to wait 3 months to take an HIV test because that's how long it takes for the virus to be detected after exposure. After that, I didn't feel safe in my relationships or going back to work, but I had to. I had no one I could talk to about it. Even my friend blamed me when I told her what had happened. We live in a society that blames people for being raped instead of blaming the one who raped them. Arab Muslim women like me can't come forward about rape and sexual abuse without being potential victims of honor killing for bringing shame to our families. All people risk shame, stigma, and not being believed.
30 seconds.
If we come forward about being raped. If we're sex workers, we risk being arrested, re-traumatized, and sexually assaulted by corrupt cops who see us as easy targets. For someone who is already struggling with bills and experiencing housing instability, this financial and emotional burden could put them over the edge. I apologize, but I have a lot more. I'll just skip to the last part. For those who think decriminalizing sex work would contribute to social decline, I hope you know that many of us contribute positively to society. We create businesses and nonprofits and social enterprises that are needed in our communities, funded directly by our sex work money. For those of us who are seen as contributing to social decline via drug use, poverty, homelessness, criminalization will not help. It only makes things worse. People in bad situations will do whatever they have to survive.
I'm sorry.
And
I have to ask you.
Please, may I please finish?
Ma'am, I've been very strict with, and I know the type of courage it took for you to tell your story here, but I shut down other folks. I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap it up, please.
We ask you for the good of humanity to decriminalize sex work in the state of Louisiana by voting in favor of HB 67. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. I did have one more question because I know that like adult filming is legal. So
Yes.
with your work with trafficking, how does that intertwine? Are you involved in? I don't know if they have adult filming in New Orleans, but
I'm sure there is. If somebody was being forced, tricked, or coerced to do any kind of labor, that fell under human trafficking. If somebody did it consensually, it didn't.
so are you seeing that adult film, which is legal,
Mm-hmm.
are you seeing that is a impetus for more trafficking or not?
Because it's labor, it is, but this is no more impetus than working at McDonald's or in a hotel. So anybody that's being forced to work in any industry, whether it's adult or not, that's human trafficking. If they're doing it consensually, it's not. Because sex trafficking falls into the morality issue, it gets conflated a lot of times with consensual sex work and reported as such. And that's harmful to being able to divert the funding and attention to where human trafficking actually is.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wendy Cooper and Desiree Jones.
You want to go first, Wendy? Or you want me to go? You want me to speak first?
That's fine.
Okay.
Good
Bear
morning.
with me. This is my first time doing this, so I have everything in my phone. I'll be brief. Hello, and good Tuesday to you all. I stand before you in a very vulnerable state today.
You have to identify yourself first.
My name
for
is
the record.
Desiree Jones, and I'm a third-generation sex worker. Hello, and good Tuesday to you all. I stand before you in a very vulnerable state today. Why, might you ask? The answer is simple. I am a young African-American woman who chose sex work as my means to survive in a world where I am constantly ridiculed and shunned, not only by my peers, but also by the government. Every day, I walk in fear because there isn't any protection for me or anyone who looks like me or chose the same line of work as me. Who do you run to when your life is in danger or something happens where you need to call law enforcement? You typically would call the police, you would file a police report, and they would make you feel as if you are safe from whatever had happened. Well, that's not the case for myself and others of my colleagues and sex workers in the state of Louisiana. On September 15th, 2020, at approximately 5:45 p.m., an undercover Jefferson Parish police officer arranged a meeting with me in a sting operation. Before I knew it, I was in the back of a police car being taken to the police station. On that day, I had never felt so unsafe, so unprotected, and humiliated in my entire life. My arresting officer was very rude to me, and he asked me questions such as, why are you doing this? Is it because you just enjoy having sex? And making remarks such as, your parents must be very proud that their daughter's a prostitute. I was ultimately charged with solicitation and prostitution and charged $550 in court fines. Why is it okay for any human being to be treated in such a way? Two consenting adults should not be shunned upon or arrested and taken to jail for simply surviving or making a living in whichever they see fit for themselves. No human being should feel unsafe or that they can't seek help from law enforcement. I don't want anyone to feel that same shame and humiliation that I felt on that day. I feel that all women should be protected no matter their choice in work. It is cruel and unfair to lock away good people only because their line of work does not align with someone else's political or religious beliefs. I come before you today in hopes that my voice can be heard and that a change can be made so that people like me are not being arrested and taken away to jail from their families or treated less than a human being. Thank you for your time and your patience.
Thank you, Ms. Jones.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Wendy Cooper. I am a woman of trans experience. In 2011, I received my bachelor's in science at Southern University of New Orleans. In 2015, I received my master's in criminal justice at Southern University of New Orleans with a concentration of juvenile justice. I am the executive director of Transcending Women. Our mission is to support and empower all women so they can become agents of change in their communities. I'm here today to speak about Louisiana Crime Against Nature statute. I want to talk about my experience because it reflects what was happened to so many other Black trans women. The Crime Against Nature statute dates back to the 1800s, but it was in the late 1980s that police started to target Black trans women with this law. Plenty of people, including some people who have been leaders of this very legislature, have done the things defined as crime against nature, but the vast majority of the time, it's only the people who look like me who are punished. I have 2 crime against nature convictions on my record. I was not actually engaging in sex work for either conviction, but because of those convictions...
Excuse me, the mic, when you covering the mic, it's hard for us to transmit.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I have 2 crime against nature convictions on my record. I was not actually engaging in sex work for either conviction, but because of those convictions, I needed to engage in sex work to survive. I had trouble finding a job. When I found a job, I lost it because someone found out I had a crime against nature conviction. A lot of things were inaccessible because I had to register as a sex offender. What was else was I was supposed to do? Sex work helped me. Our society shouldn't punish or push people out and then punish them for what we have to do to survive. That's all this bill, House Bill 67 is trying to do. It's just making sure people are not punished for doing what they need to do to live. And I don't want to hear that this is a moral issue. If the state of Louisiana really thought that it was wrong to sell sex, then they wouldn't profit from it by taxing adult pornography. Those taxes help pay these lawmakers' salaries. They just don't like street-based sex work because they can't make any money off it. So let's start with the hypocrisy. Sex work is just work. Legislators need to pass House Bill 67 so that no one else has to face a criminal record just to make a living. And me want to just say these last few words out of respect, and I just want these words to resonate in your mind. So you all do know that in Louisiana, if you was charged, if you was to engage in oral or anal sex, that you can be charged with crime against nature, and you can get up to 5 years in prison. And I know some of y'all may have husbands and wives and boyfriends and girlfriends, and if you are caught engaging in that type of activity, then you can be charged with it. And as leaders of our state, you know what the people would do. They will try to shame y'all. They will try to force y'all to apologize about something that is, I feel like that is, it's recreational for everyone. And so I just want y'all to know that with this bill, I feel like y'all need to repeal this bill, because this bill can help save, lives of others. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ariel Quinn and Ramalika.
You want to go first? You can go. Okay. Hello.
Hi.
My name is Ariel Quinn. Thank you for taking the time to hear from us. I've lived and worked in Louisiana for 8 years. I'm currently a student at the University of New Orleans, and I expect to graduate next spring with a BFA in studio art and a minor in history. I began doing various forms of sex work 6 years ago because I sought a job that allowed me the time to aid my community and the flexibility to work on art. With this free time, I've been able to attend various training sessions, such as first aid, overdose response, and community medicine. Most importantly, I have been able to help other alcoholics and addicts. Just over 5 years ago, I was an active alcoholic until I began a process of recovery. My belief in God and dedicating myself to helping others has been the chief reason I've been able to stay sober these last few years. Through my experience with drugs and alcohol, alongside my experience with sex work, I've been able to help many sex workers upon the path to spirituality and recovery. I started doing sex work when I was about 2 years sober, and I haven't looked back since, full time, that is. Through the work, I've discovered connections with people, and probably not the type of connections you would assume. Most of my job, in fact, is talking. I'm able to talk with people who lead completely separate lives from my own. These people expose me to ideas and ways of thinking that I'm less aware of in my normal day-to-day. In turn, I'm able to offer my own perspectives and perhaps open their eyes a little as well. The deep truth in these exchanges, as I've experienced it, is that we are all the same in a way. We all struggle with daily challenges, big and small, with insecurities and loss. And we all seek comfort from others when we are lonely. We are looking for our place in the world and hoping that this journey of discovery also pays the bills. Through my work, I'm able to take certain precautions using security measures to keep myself safe, but not all have this luxury. The vast majority of workers are at the mercy of the night with no legal recourse against bad actors. Most sex workers who have attempted to report violent attacks have found very little support from law enforcement and are often prosecuted themselves simply for admitting their line of work. This prejudice extends to question the credibility of any sex worker. Most sex workers hesitate to report any crime they witness or are subjected to on or off the clock. Sex workers disappear, never to be found, or only found after meeting a tragic end. We do not ask for help from official channels, and we rely only on the help we can give each other. This is why we're here today. We're here asking for your help. We are asking you to repeal these 13 laws and decriminalize our work. These laws that no doubt were created to protect us are in fact actively harming us. We are here to tell you that we don't need saving by anyone or anything except these 13 laws. As you will likely notice,
30 seconds.
Thank you. Most of us are rather intelligent. As you probably see, as we stand in front of you united together, we are organized. And because of this, you can be sure that if we ever need anything more from you, we will tell you. And if we see another individual or group that needs your help, we will tell you. If more needs to be done to curb violent crime or human trafficking, you will be hearing from us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn.
Greetings, everyone. Thank y'all for your time, and thank you to all those who've organized to get us here today. My name is Ramalika Impotep, and I'm representing Southerners on New Ground. I am a Black, queer, disabled artist, a PhD student, a rape survivor, and a recreational sex worker. And I can tell you that recreational sex work has been for me a tool for healing, for political education, for organizing. Since 1993, Southerners on New Ground has been a political home and kinship network for LGBTQIA Southerners who are actively working to manifest liberation from all forms of oppression in our lifetime. Sex workers have always been an essential part of our base. Sex workers are our people, our mothers, our caretakers, our mediators, our facilitators, our organizers, our healers, and our visionaries. Sex workers are with us as we flood the streets to oppose police brutality, as we interrupt the heinous malpractices of ICE detainment officers, as we campaign for livable wages, as we build mutual aid networks to take care of each other's basic needs. We need each other. We need sex workers because queer and trans people are systemically left out of formal economies. So because the state, which you all represent, does not take care of us, we take care of each other using every means we have. While many of us do not have property to stake our claims on, we do have our bodies. Laws that criminalize sex work criminalize our ability to survive, utilizing the only sovereign thing many of us can lay claim to, our bodies. In a country, but particularly a state that is haunted by the material traces of slavery, the criminalization of survival through the criminalization of adult consensual sex work furthers legacies of violence that sought to dictate what people could do with their bodies and when. I can say proudly that I am here today because of people, Black women in particular, who made choices about how to use their bodies to support their own survival and the survivals of their kin. Some of those choices included back-breaking agricultural work and domestic labor, and some included sex work, which often showed up in all the spaces they would choose to work. It feels urgent that we repeal laws that further the state's control over individuals, and that we take seriously the ways that criminalization disproportionately impacts folks who have already been kept out of traditional economies by discrimination on the basis of race, gender, sexuality, and presentation. Y'all seem to like Bible stories, so I could get up here and talk about Lilith, Eve, Jezebel, Mary Magdalene, and Salome, or all the other misunderstood women of the Christian holy book who were self-possessed and often associated with sex work, and no less holy. But we don't even have to look that far for the ways that sex work, the oldest profession in the history of human civilization, has been integral to the ways we have sustained life everywhere on this planet. If you have ever derived sexual pleasure from a performance, show, massage, or encounter that you or somebody else paid for, you have been a beneficiary of a sex worker. If someone cleaning your house or table or office has gone out of their way to make you feel good, then you have been a beneficiary of sex work. Would you like it if those moments concluded in your criminalization or the criminalization of those who served and brought you pleasure? These laws are not about safety. They are about controlling and limiting the freedoms of those who this society wishes didn't exist here freely. And that's why it's important that we repeal them. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Swarm Harris. Marissa Bosley.
Good morning. My name is Julie Schwab Harris.
Julie, pull it up closer. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Julie Schwab Harris. I am from New Orleans, and I do volunteer advocacy work on issues of economic justice for women and for workers in general. I'm here to put some context, economic context, to what we're talking about today. People in Louisiana have a hard time making it, and I know you've heard about that through the United Way Alice report that talks about over 50% of the families in our state are not making it economically with the economy that we have here. Louisiana ranks last in the economy in the new U.S. News and World Report ranking of all states. We rank last in a lot of rankings of all states, and a lot of that is due to the economy. If you break that down by gender and by race, the statistics are much worse, much more horrifying. Louisiana is the third highest state in the nation for poverty, with a rate of 19%. The rate of men in poverty here is about 14. The rate of women in poverty is about 20. And the rate of children in poverty is about 29. And when you break that down further by race, it's more horrifying. The African American and Latina poverty rate is twice that of whites, over twice that for African Americans. And the wage gap for women, we were either at the bottom for many, many years, at the bottom meaning having the largest gap, or we've been close to the bottom, which is where we are now, with women making about 72 cents on the dollar, Black women making, and this is median wages, this is not any individual person, this is averaging out for median wages, Black women are making 49 cents on the dollar, and Latina women are making 53, and trying to raise children because they're larger and larger breadwinners in their families. The types of work that women tend to be clustered in for all kinds of reasons, and not always choice, are the ones that pay the lowest. The service work, it's low paying, it's front line, it's at high risk for infection, we learned during COVID. It offers very few of them paid leave, paid sick leave even, to not infect their clients or other workers, and very inflexible hours. They do not get to choose when to work. They do not have access to quality, affordable childcare. They can't afford it, and we don't cover enough the subsidies needed for women to have childcare. About 2/3 of the minimum wage workers in this state are women, and this state has the second highest rate of people making minimum wage of any state in the nation. All this is tied together as far as making us such a low wage state. Though some sex work is done by choice, much is done for survival and very practical purposes. It's a low barrier entry to work. It's not hard to get the work. It allows workers access to immediate wages. You're not waiting for a check and having to have a bank or go somewhere that somebody will take an ID that you may or may not have to get the wages. Sex work makes a lot of sense in the context of the Louisiana economy and the way that we treat people and workers all together, not just sex workers. For this and the many reasons you've heard today, please vote for HB 67. And know that I'm going to be asking you also to vote to raise the minimum wage, to vote for equal pay for women by allowing people to talk about wages in the workplace, to uncover discrimination and other things such as tax credits that allow people to survive. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You got in like 4 bills in one. We got you. we got you.
But today at 67.
I got you.
Hi everyone. I'm Marissa Bosley. I'm a law student. I'm here representing Louisiana Reform. So I'm here to express for Louisiana Reform how important Landry's bill to decriminalize sex work is. For so many different groups of people. So I have heard that some think sex work is dangerous. Well, I think working in oil is dangerous, but it's not criminalized. Sex work should be the same. I'm the 2019 graduated president of Tigers Against Trafficking at LSU. I assisted in the movement to end child marriage here in Louisiana, and I'm here to reiterate how this bill protects trafficking victims. One of the manipulative tactics the trafficker uses is to convince the victim that they cannot go to law enforcement because they are a prostitute under the law. Victims often do not trust law enforcement, especially when certain institutions have not been taking care of cases of rape. The victim has no one to turn to because they also have no legal job, no history, or they are at this point physically forced to remain in captivity. There are less protections for adult victims of human trafficking across the country, so adult victims are regularly arrested and convicted on charges for prostitution for no reason. With the decriminalization of prostitution, sex work, solicitation, and everything this bill offers, this is not an issue. I also wrote an article that is being published basically as we speak in the Journal of Race, Gender, and Poverty, The Criminalization of Human Trafficking Victims, a discussion on whether to vacate their felonies. Now, my article focused on how a victim could be arrested on violent offenses that they were forced to commit by the trafficker, but there is one case from my article that is relevant here that I want to highlight. In the legal case in Arica, the girl Arica was a human trafficking victim from 14 years old to 17 years old when she was rescued. It was only months later when she was arrested without being trafficked for consensual solicitation of sex, one of the crimes decriminalized in this bill. In the case of Arica, all she knew from as young as middle school age was sex work training. She was not in school. Yet at the age of majority, she is convicted for solicitation of sex only months after being rescued. The criminal justice system failed her. With this bill as law, survivors will not be convicted like her in Louisiana. This bill will help survivors pull themselves out of their trafficking situations by keeping their income. In this way, this bill will focus on convicting the trafficker instead of the victim. Please vote in favor of HB 67. Thank you.
Thank you. Where are you in law school?
Southern University.
I can tell. I can tell. Pretty strong.
Thanks.
In under 3 minutes. Zachary Kernwood and Beth.
I'll be quick. Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me? My name is Zachary Kernwood. I'm a registered nurse in New Orleans. I took work off today fighting COVID to be here because I think it's that important. I'm here to support this bill to decriminalize sex work. I have extensive experience working with the community that this bill impacts, and people who do sex work, as well as people who have been trafficked. And I can say with certainty from my professional experience that when something is a crime that could lead you to go to jail, you're not going to be honest with your healthcare provider who might be able to get you help. As nurses, we're on the front lines of identifying people who are being trafficked. It's one of the first questions we ask them when they walk in the door of the hospital. And why would you be honest with me if you were trafficked, if you could possibly go to jail, where you're not going to be able to get very good health care, right? I mean, I see a lot of patients that are being held in correctional facilities in this state, and I could tell you with certainty that they are horrible places to receive health care, or connection to services that might help someone in a situation where they're being trafficked. That's really all I have to say today. By decriminalizing sex work in Louisiana, we will be connecting people to healthcare and to resources in this community that really needs it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So thank you, Criminal Justice Committee, for having us today. My name is Beth. In addition to being a current sex worker, I am a public health professional, researcher, and Masters of Public Health student at the University of California at Berkeley. I have had the honor of serving our state at the Louisiana Department of Health Office of Public Health STD HIV program from 2016 to 2019, and I currently do program evaluation for a statewide organization. I'm here to tell you and urge you to proceed with House Bill 67 because criminalization poses significant public health risks, but not the risks that you expect. The public health burden of sex work criminalization falls on us. My research has found that sex workers' experiences with law enforcement raids contributed to long-term PTSD, financial distress, and put one participant at an increased risk for victimization by sex trafficking. Other multiple international studies have found that criminalization laws and policing elevate sex workers' risk for negative health outcomes like PTSD, STIs, and violence at the hands of clients and police alike. Further exacerbating these health disparities, sex workers face barriers and discrimination seeking healthcare, housing, and other services. Oh, crap. Like, the screen locked on me. All right. Lastly, I'd like to remind all of y'all that our state faces a significant STI and HIV burden, but sex workers are not the primary factor contributing to this burden. Our state's own annual STD and HIV report notes that racism, incarceration, and lack of access to medical care drive our high rates of preventable sexually transmitted infections. Criminalizing sex work is not helping our state's public health outcomes. So again, I urge you to vote yes on House Bill 67 and ensure health and justice for our committee now. And I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. No questions at this time, but thank you. Thank you as well. Katie Hunter Lowry, Nicole Gomez.
I guess I'll go first. Let me take this off. My name is Nicole Gomez. Thank you for having me. I prepared a little statement, so it's 3 minutes. I timed it exactly. I'm here today to talk about the decriminalization of sex work in the state of Louisiana. I am a sex worker and a veteran of the industry for the last 10 years. I am here representing my experience as a woman of color, a community member of the LGBTQ community, and as a trauma survivor. Sex work is often spoken of as taboo and as something that is immoral, when in reality, many people are or have been sex workers at some point in their lives. You probably know a sex worker who is not out. Our experiences are many and nuanced and deserve to be given a platform that honors the complexities of our experiences. This job has been the difference between nutritious food options and skipping meals and eating out of the garbage for me. It has created opportunities for independence from state resources and offered me the ability to address financial emergencies with ease. It has helped me leave behind the stress of a paycheck-to-paycheck standard of living to being able to access safe housing and financial stability. Sex work is a job, plain and simple, and like other jobs, is a means to live, survive, and thrive. Removing the danger of criminalization is the difference between accessing safe and reasonable housing without the threat of an arrest record following you. Decriminalizing sex work means that those of us who are the most marginalized can operate our business knowing that we can access support without fear of arrest. One arrest can restrict a person from accessing opportunities that allow for one to exit the industry. Being able to safely operate in this industry means that we can reach out for help and support and have legal options to assist us when violence is perpetrated against us. Everyone deserves equal access to justice. Decriminalization not only reduces unnecessary state intervention, reducing cost burdens on taxpayers, but also helps determine who is actually a victim of trafficking and who is working consensually. The sex worker community is deeply invested in ending human trafficking, and decriminalization is a step towards self-determination and access to justice. My experience is but one of many, and this testimony, me standing here, is meant to illustrate how different and unique each of our stories and lives are. Not a single one of our experience is a monolith. I am asking you to withdraw any judgments that you may have about our jobs, and remember that your job is to create and foster a standard of living and culture of equity, equality, and opportunity for all Louisianans. Sex work for many means independence, and decriminalization means freedom for all of us. And that's it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You did good on your timing.
Good.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, committee members. Thanks so much for hearing this bill. My name is Katie Hunter Lowry. I'm the crime survivor organizer with the Promise of Justice Initiative, where I coordinate Louisiana Survivors for Reform. We are a coalition of crime survivors, homicide victims, loved ones, and organizations creating change in the criminal justice system. We believe the voice of every survivor should be heard, and that the primary focus of reform should be supporting all impacted individuals and communities. We know that too often victims are silenced or ignored, and I want to really thank all the survivors who testified today, whether it's the first time or the 100th time you're sharing your story. It's incredibly brave. We support this bill and the decriminalization of sex work because this is one more pathway to survivors getting help when they need it. We know that the vast majority of sexual assault survivors do not report to law enforcement for a variety of reasons. This is especially true for anyone at a high risk of becoming a criminalized survivor. And sex workers are not inherently victims, they're workers. People in any profession can be assaulted or harmed. The difference is when a sex worker is a survivor of harm, they cannot safely seek support because of these current laws. In Louisiana, there are 7 parishes currently without a sexual assault center. Representative Muscarello, in your district, Tangipahoa Parish, there is no sexual assault center. And if a survivor wants to seek services, they have to go through the district attorney's office. So if a survivor chooses not to press charges, or their case is dropped, or they can't report for fear of arrest, they have no local access to advocacy or support in healing. And for many victims, access to culturally competent, safe, non-judgmental services is the difference between life and death after experiencing an attack, a rape, or assault. Without making it safe for sex workers to report when they need to, Louisiana is silencing and ignoring survivors. Last week, when this committee was discussing Representative Nelson's bill on marijuana, Representative Marino, you said, we can't tell people in their own homes you can't do this. And I do not understand how this would be any different. By decriminalizing consensual acts between consenting adults, we are creating a safer environment for workers. And this is a means for victims and witnesses to report without fear of criminalization and seek what they need for healing. So we ask you to move favorably at the right time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Melissa Flournoy, Louisiana Progress, and Dr. Deary.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning, Melissa. How are you?
I'm good. I'm Melissa Flournoy. I'm the board chair of Louisiana Progress, and I'm a former member of the Louisiana legislature. And I'm here today to thank Representative Landry for her compassion and leadership, and also to thank these brave women who have come to speak to you today to tell their truth. I'm here to support House Bill 67 to decriminalize sex work, and I'm here today to talk about morality and hypocrisy. based on the behavior of way too many men in Louisiana and many who are elected officials, and I won't name all the names today, but David Vitter comes to mind, men who have participated in sex work as patrons. So I want to tell the story before we demonize these women and we talk about morality, because there are two sides to this story. If we don't decriminalize, then we need to talk about the patrons of sex workers, because they are now criminals too. You heard about the efforts of Jefferson Parish in setting up stings and sort of the unfortunate outcome of our efforts, which have unintended consequences and drive trafficked victims even further into obscurity and vulnerability. But unfortunately, the men are rarely punished, arrested, or publicly humiliated. I remember back 20 years ago and the Canal Street Madam, and I just watched the documentary the other day. I recommend it to you. And the number of prominent men in Louisiana, judges, doctors, elected officials, lawyers, prominent businessmen, who were frequently patrons of various brothels in New Orleans. I venture to guess there are still brothels in New Orleans, and there are still men patronizing sex work. But in the event that we do not pass House Bill 67 today and support it, I would encourage you to look at the criminalization of the patrons of sex work. Because if we don't, I guess the bottom line, and I'm close to my 3 minutes, is that let's live in the real world, Representative James. Let's acknowledge the behavior of adult humans. Let's know that there are people we know, some who serve in this body in the past, present, and probably future, who will have paid for consensual sex. If we don't prosecute the men who are driving force for sex work, then we shouldn't be prosecuting the women either. So let's realize that today you have heard the heartfelt stories of women who have chosen to pursue sex work as a means to support themselves and their families. It's appropriate to decriminalize sex work, and if not for the women, do it for the men. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Doctor.
Thank you very much. I just want to first acknowledge you all here on the criminal justice. I'd like to thank Representative Landry. I've been on record of saying that Women with a Vision is an organization that I admire, and they are my heroes. But I have new heroes today, and those are the amazing women that have made their brave testimonies today. My name is Dr. Mark Landry. I am an infectious diseases physician. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for ACLU of Louisiana, and I'm the Medical Director of Infectious Diseases for ACLU of Louisiana. We are the largest FQHC Medicaid providing clinic system in the state of Louisiana, with 40 clinics throughout the state. I'm here in full support of HB 67, which supports full decriminalization of sex work. This bill would repeal sex work related offenses, thereby decriminalizing many forms of sex work. From an infectious diseases and public health perspective, this bill would remove barriers to HIV services, including preventative services and other healthcare services. Successful passage of the bill would also help to eliminate barriers to accessing affordable housing, public benefits, and unemployment opportunities. When I first came to Louisiana 16 years ago as an infectious diseases doctor, I found out that my patients who were sex workers could be harassed for carrying condoms. In fact, condoms are used to persecute as well. And that's just plain wrong. In my clinic, I have buckets of condoms. Because condoms prevent transmission of sexually transmitted infections, full decriminalization and passage of HB 67 would encourage the continued use of condoms without fear of persecution. Full decriminalization would also help to destigmatize sex work. My patients tell me regularly that they do not tell other physicians their occupation, putting them at risk for not getting the most comprehensive care possible. The stigma associated with sex work, which could be eliminated with this bill, would also make it more likely for sex workers to access medical care in the setting of physical abuse. And aside from the public health benefits, decriminalization maximizes legal protections and the ability to exercise other key rights, including access to justice. Decriminalization maximizes protection, dignity, and equity. This bill is the first step toward destigmatizing sex work. Decriminalization respects human rights and dignity. Decriminalization helps guard against violence and abuse. Decriminalization will challenge police abuse and violence. Decriminalization will improve access to justice. Decriminalization challenges the consequences of having a criminal record. Decriminalization promotes safe working conditions. And furthermore, decriminalization challenges state control over bodies and sexuality. I am fully supportive of the passage of HB 67, and I'm here to ask for your support as well. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Laura Levine. Amanda Sanfilippo.
Good afternoon, members of the committee, and thank you for having all of us. My name is Laura Levine, and I come before you as a sex worker.
Can you pull the mic closer, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that better? Okay. Yeah. So I come before you as a sex worker, and as you now recognize, for many of us, this is immensely vulnerable. Being out about the work that we do, even if we take pride in it, even if it sustains us, even if we've had positive experiences, as I have for over a decade. This is a chosen occupation for me, one that has allowed me to travel, to take care of my family, to become educated, and to afford myself everything that a person should be able to afford themselves in their life. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. But with that said, I also recognize there are so many more marginalized people at risk as long as we have sex work being criminalized. And so long as this work is criminalized, the most marginalized and the most vulnerable will continue to be harmed, overlooked, and pushed to the margins. So I come before you as somebody who has chosen this work, has had a positive experience advocating for this bill being passed, and strongly urging you to work with all communities where sex work is integral, which is overarchingly most communities. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Amanda Sanfilippo, and I want to thank you, committee members, for hearing my testimony, and especially thanks to all the people who have been on this path of resilience, of liberation, towards creating greater democracy for decades and lifetimes. Those are the sex workers here and the activists. I am here as a mother and a grandmother and a sexual educator, working as a teacher and board member of the New Orleans Adolescent Reproductive Health Program, a program started by Dr. Ryan Pasternak and composed of LSU and Tulane medical students. We teach comprehensive sexual education in public schools. Comprehensive, meaning it teaches about the critical importance of consent and the acceptance of sexual preferences and how to be safe and healthy in all romantic and sexual encounters. I am here to say that in my professional and personal opinion as a teacher, a birth worker, and a parent, the decriminalization of sex work is in no way harmful to youth. Also, an important point is that by the decriminalizing of sex work, we as a state and the people in it can relieve poignant fear and crippling shame and stigma for the students and youth who have relatives, parents, and friends who are sex workers and also may get sex work. If this bill passes, then there will be acknowledgement that consensual adult sex is not a crime. It will also allow people engaging in the consensual trade of sex as labor for cash or goods that it is aligned with any and all other honorable professions, yours included. Also, if my grandchildren want to take up this profession of sex work, they will have my full care, love, and support. And I will feel that their decision could be even wiser if they are not seen as criminals or morally judged by those that make the laws in this state. By decriminalizing sex work, anybody could seek protection rather than criminalization from law enforcement. They would also have more incentive to find health care, and as you have heard from nurses and doctors here, that they would feel safer being honest with their healthcare providers, thus improving health at large for all citizens in the United States, much less Louisiana, who are, I'm sorry, as you've also heard, we are in epidemic proportions with STIs and other illnesses, not just STIs. It would also reinforce us as teachers of health in public and private schools that everyone should feel encouraged to be protected and safe in telling their healthcare providers about any and all issues they may have without shame or fear. I implore you to pass this bill from your committee onto the House as a mother, as a Louisiana resident, and a teacher of children and youth for 20 years.
Thank you so much. We still have several more cards. I'm going to ask that some of you all on both sides consider waiving for this bill and others, because we are now under 2 hours and we still have two very, very important bills, and we have to be done by 2. So it's just a request. Will Harrell with Vote and Maxwell Shardula with Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. You're not Will.
I play him on TV, though. My name is Bruce Riley. I'm the Deputy Director of Vote. And, you know, we like to honor the courage of all the healers, the mothers, the sisters, the daughters, the people who came forward to share their story so that you could better understand what's happening in our society. It's really challenging for people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system to share what's going on in their lives. And so that's something that the people here today, you should be thankful for, I hope. There's things that are criminalized in our society that are moral, and there's things that harm other people. And in this case, it's people's conflicting morals about what's right and wrong. You can't give restitution if there's no victim, right? And we talk about that a lot in the criminal legal system, about trying to make it right, make people whole, to not harm others. It's an understandable thing to cut down on those crimes. In this case, you know, there isn't a victim. And the very fact that you can insert a camera and all of a sudden it's legal should be, you know, problematic to whether or not this is a rightful crime. In our work, you know, we're often trying to deal with the repercussions of after the conviction, after the incarceration. And so it's a double whammy to think that you're helping people get them out of poverty or trafficking, to then put them in a worse position. And then we're back here talking about laws to reduce the discrimination that people face, the things that you've heard from people over and over again today. So to put fewer people into the system makes less work on the criminal legal system and the incarceration system and then the discrimination system that happens after the fact. So we encourage you to cut down on putting people into the criminal legal system, and this is one big easy way to do that. We heard earlier about gambling, which, you know, 30 years ago was illegal. And I'm sure some of you have different opinions morally about whether gambling is okay or not. Maybe your pastor has different opinions whether it's okay or not. Things that are legal you don't have to partake in. You know, you may have a moral opposition to Bama fans living in the state of Louisiana, but the fact is they can live here, right? And so the very fact that something, you know, may rub you the wrong way doesn't mean that you as a legislator have to vote against it when you're looking out for the betterment of all the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Maxwell.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee. My name is Maxwell Chardula. I'm the Director of Policy and Communications with the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. I'll be quick. We're a statewide nonprofit working primarily in housing discrimination, and many of you have seen me before the House Commerce or Judiciary Committee this session or last session, speaking about the chaos and long-term harm that an eviction record can cause to someone's ability to find future housing. Those records can prolong homelessness and deny people homes and jobs, and the instability that they create wreaks havoc on people's ability to stay healthy, their children's school attendance, and can even harm fetal development. I'm here today because the same is true for even low-level nonviolent criminal records like those covering charges related to sex work. We've applauded y'all for your work on criminal justice reform, and we appreciate your understanding that we cannot arrest and incarcerate our way out of our state's problems. And that feels especially true for consensual sex work. It's a profession that's been around forever, and criminalization has not diminished it. But it does create a feedback loop of instability and negative consequences. And that starts with the fact that someone supporting themselves or their family through criminalized sex work cannot prove their income. And when you can't prove your income, you can't apply for a home. Without a stable place to live, people end up in more dangerous situations and are at higher risk of violence and arrest. And once arrested, the charges often result in plea deals, short sentences, or fines, but the unintended consequence is a lifetime of difficulty in finding a roof over one's head. And that makes it harder for families to reunite. It makes it harder for people to find work when they don't have a stable address. It makes it harder to keep a doctor's appointment when you're constantly couch surfing or living off of someone else's generosity. So rather than criminalization, one of the most productive responses to sex work, especially for those doing sex work for economic survival, would be to shift some of our resources away from incarceration and instead invest in stable housing, higher wages, and other supports that would allow people to find other work if they so choose. So I thank you for your time and your willingness to consider this issue through a new lens, and I hope you'll support HB 67. Thank you.
Thank you, Maxwell. Francis Gill, Stacy Lewin.
Hello, my name is Frances Gill. Thank you to the committee for hearing this bill. I'm a medical student, although I'll be graduating very soon, so in a little over a month I'll be a practicing physician. And additionally, I'm one of the co-chairs of the New Orleans chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. We're a local chapter of an organization with over 100,000 members nationally. We have over 600 dues-paying members in New Orleans, and we have groups in Baton Rouge, Lafayette and Lake Charles, Shreveport, Houma, and at Louisiana Tech. We were honored to join Women with a Vision's campaign and to mobilize our members in support of this bill. The number one thing that I want to leave you with during this 3 minutes is that our members were very excited to mobilize in support of this bill, and we knocked hundreds of doors in many of the districts of members of this committee. And the overwhelming sentiment that we found at the door when we were talking to constituents was support for this bill. Why is it any of the government's business was a prevailing sentiment. But we're democratic socialists, which means that we believe in the power of an organized working class to be the driving force towards a better and more just world. Our members include workers from healthcare, education, construction, the service industry, public health, city workers, the legal system, and sex workers. In other words, I am testifying as a worker who is interested in winning every worker the right to thrive. While sex work is criminalized, it is impossible for sex workers to come together with the legal protections to organize for better, safer working conditions. And we're locking a particular set of laborers out of the resources and support needed to combat abuses in the field. While sex work is criminalized, sex workers cannot as easily combat wage theft or workplace harassment or dangerous working conditions or stigmatization of their labor. And it's harder to organize together for higher wages, for health insurance, and for safer workplaces. In other words, sex work is work, and a lot of times work sucks. And I can speak on all of that from experience. As a college student paying for my first apartment on the tips that I made working at a pizzeria, I entered the field of sex work to make ends meet. Much of the work I did was legal, but not all of it. Much of the work I did was quite safe, but not all of it. And although I was ultimately a day tripper in the sex work industry, and the risks I took were nothing compared to the risks that many women take every day, it is easy for me to imagine a number of times where things could have gone wrong. And where could I have turned, knowing that the work I was doing to pay my rent was illegal? Without any of the protections that I could have counted on if my work had been recognized as work by the state. If a customer or coworker at the pizzeria crossed the line, it's easy to know what to do. That's just not the case in all situations. So stand up for workers, stand up for sex workers, and vote yes on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, committee. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for your time. My name is Stacy Lunan. I have been living and working in New Orleans for 4 years, and I have been a sex worker for a decade. I was at first hesitant to share my personal story with you because it is often a tale told in favor of criminalizing sex work or casting all sex workers as abused and in need of rescue. But I am here to flip the script and tell you the tale of how being a sex worker helped me heal from childhood trauma. My father is a pedophile. He raped and abused me from shortly after birth until 10 years old. As a result of this abuse, I endured years of untreated major depressive disorder, chronic anxiety, complex PTSD, atypical anorexia, and many other unwanted maladies, both physical and mental. Because of these issues, I was unable to complete a degree, hold a part or full-time job, or support myself through other avenues. I turned to sex work, as so many do, to survive. I began working in a club and answering ads on Craigslist, and was able to scrape by financially. I soon found financial freedom, and while money has allowed me to access life-saving medications and treatments and pay my bills with ease, the camaraderie, care, support, love, and lessons in life and how to have firm boundaries from my fellow sex workers are by far the greatest gifts I have ever been given. I was never taught to refuse a man until a fellow stripper put me in front of the dressing room mirror and made me say no until I believed myself. She was my first lesson in self-defense and the power of my words. I was never taught to see myself as beautiful and worthy of attention until a pornographer took my photo and I saw myself through someone else's gaze for the first time. He was my first lesson in acceptance. I was never taught to understand my body as a sacred vessel until a fellow escort gave me a guided meditation and massage, directing me to thank my body for its healing wisdom and resilience after I was raped for the third time on the job and could not report it to the police without criminalizing myself. She was my first lesson in community care and organizing. I never truly believed in God because of what was done to me as a child, until a client told me that our regular sessions over a few months' time had saved him from suicide. He was my lesson in trusting a higher power and what it meant to truly be in service of that power. Many years, lessons, and clients later, I am here before you today to tell you that I could not be the happy and very healthy person I am today without having engaged in this work. From a starving 18-year-old on the verge of homelessness to a thriving 28-year-old on the verge of starving my second business, I am living proof that this work is not the root of all evil and is in fact an avenue towards freedom for many. However, while in the pursuit of that freedom, so many sex workers are stigmatized, disrespected, denigrated, assaulted, raped, murdered, and preventing from engaging in civil society simply because, quite frankly, you designate our labor as criminalized. I ask you to honor what is guaranteed to all Americans: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the recognition that decriminalization of sex work would mean just that for the many whose voices have been silenced, whose lives have been disrupted by the fallout of criminalization in the name of law and order. I urge you to pass HB 67 in recognition of liberty and justice for all. And further, if you feel the need to save sex workers, I ask you not to look to your pastor, but to Jesus. He is the one who hung out with sex workers. He is the one who hung out with the poor, the one society wishes to throw out. And if you'd like to save us, I ask you follow his advice and intend to include us in society. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse, was this Nibless with LAFASA? I have not. Okay. We have a couple more. Hillary McQueen. Marika Maypop.
Hello, my name is Hillary McQuay. I'm going to make this very short because other people have already made my points. I'm here on behalf of Crescent Care Health Center. It's formerly known as No AIDS Task Force in New Orleans. We're a federally qualified health center, and we strongly support this bill for all the reasons that many people have testified to, especially Dr. Derry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, committee. Thank you for your time and attention. My name is Marika Maypop.
I have been a Louisiana resident for 11 years. I am a trained counselor, reverend, and I have been a sex worker for 16 years. And every day, society reminds me that I should be ashamed for what I do and discriminates against me for doing it. My existence is diminished and made a mockery of. The prejudice ranges from patronizing and dismissive to demented and violent. And yet I remain incredibly proud of what I do. After working in domestic violence and sexual assault advocacy organizations, I consciously chose to enter sex work to help folks heal from past harms experienced in the body. This was one of the best decisions I have ever made. Sex work has allowed me to live independently, to attend college through a master's degree without debt, to gain crucial skills that empower me, to financially support my family, to have time to volunteer in my community, and to maintain a livelihood in which I directly witness the beneficial impacts of the service I provide. Listen, we all make choices to survive, to make ends meet. Sex work is very often an intelligible response to social, economic, and political realities. And as with any other occupation, sure, our attitudes about the work really vary. For me, it's a calling. It is a passion. I feel so strongly about the vital offering that aids people in finding connection, acceptance, and transformation. My labor as a sex worker is to support whole body wellness, including emotional and psychological intimacy. Most of us have been deeply hurt by conditional love, told we have to be some sort of way or do something in order to receive it. And the way I see it, my job as a sex worker is to provide unconditional love under the condition of payment. Under current law, this makes me and my clients criminals. I'm a criminal when a man weeps in my arms due to never being able to feel safe in his body. I'm a criminal when I spend time with two individuals living with muscular dystrophy who have never experienced the loving embrace because their caretakers were too uncomfortable with sexual expression to support them. I'm also a criminal when I seek housing and healthcare. I'm a criminal when crimes are committed against me. There is nothing inherently dangerous, damaging, or violent about sex work. Just like any other industry, what is dangerous are the criminal conditions in which it takes place. When we labor under criminalization, we are vulnerable to being seen as soft, easy targets. Rather than pushing stigma, discrimination, and false narratives about sex workers, Louisiana legislators need to listen to us, who are directly best positioned to speak about our realities and our needs. What we need is the removal of all criminal penalties.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Last two, Amanda Palomo and I can't pronounce this name. Breakout, your organization with Breakout. Can you come down if you're here? Okay. Are they waving? Okay, great. Two white cars. Jesse, you could come down, provide information, and Amanda Takovich, New Orleans Family Justice Center president, will give information, and then we get to the opposition.
Hello, my name is Jessie Niablis, and I'm the Director of Education and Prevention at the Louisiana Foundation Against Sexual Assault, or LaFASA. LaFASA is the federally mandated, state-designated coalition of sexual assault service providers, allied professionals, and survivors of sexual violence. I'm here to provide information about the impact of laws and policies related to sex work on safety, access to care, and legal protections. I'm not endorsing or opposing the bill, I'm simply providing data. This session, legislators are tackling stigma related to sexual assault, cultural impunity and apathy towards sexual violence, a lack of strong reporting mechanisms in many of our institutions, and myths about sexual assault. There are several bills addressing this that will impact how schools and workplaces create safer environments and how they handle reports of sexual violence occurs. These laws and protections, however, would not apply to sex workers as their work does not have the same legal status. Furthermore, if they report their experiences to law enforcement or other services for care, they often face even more stigma, disbelief, and violence than survivors who are not sex workers. It's been stated already, but it bears repeating. Studies show that it's stigma and laws, not sex work itself, which increases violence and decreases sex workers' ability to access the care that is available to non-sex workers who are survivors of violence. These disparities can be mitigated and even prevented. Sex workers face disproportionate violence from clients compared to workers in other fields. While it's sometimes difficult to assess sexual violence rates, studies have found that globally, sex workers have a 45 to 75% chance of experiencing sexual violence at some point in their careers, and a 32 to 55% chance of experiencing sexual violence in any given year. There was this meta-analysis of 21 journal articles that was published in the American Journal of Public Health, and they found that, quote, "The legal status of sex work can be a critical factor in shaping patterns of violence against sex workers," end quote. Evidence shows that criminalization is a major factor in this violence, both from clients and from the police. There was a 2019 study, also in the American Journal of Public Health. It looked at the impact of policing on the experiences of sex workers in Baltimore, Maryland, and it examined the link between an aggressive or abusive police practices and experience with violence from clients. And they actually found that if there was a buildup of negative interactions from police, even non-abusive or non-severely abusive interactions with police, that actually increased the likelihood of these workers experiencing violence from their clients. Police sexual violence against sex workers is prevalent. 17% of sex workers interviewed in a New York study reported sexual harassment and abuse, including rape, by police. In a Chicago study, 30% of erotic dancers and 24% of street-based sex workers who had been raped identified a police officer as the rapist. Importantly, studies show that these disparities can be mitigated. In my work on sexual violence prevention and response, I've found that removing barriers, both perceived and actual, to interpersonal violence and to reporting it has an impact on these reporting rates. I want to end by saying that these statistics, like all statistics related to sexual violence, can lead to us throwing up our hands and saying the issue is too vast, it can never be solved. Or we can recognize that sex workers have, throughout history, demonstrated resilience, solidarity, and creativity to secure their safety and the safety of others.
It's time. Thank you. Next.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Amanda Tonkovich. I'm with the New Orleans Family Justice Center. We're a service provider in Orleans Parish. We serve survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking. And I work at an intersection because I have worked with probably hundreds, probably thousands of survivors, whether it be going through the criminal justice process, getting a medical exam. And I also work to improve systems. I train police. I work with medical providers. And I have really researched best practices around this. I think Jesse shared a lot of stats, so I just kind of wanted to share a firsthand experience. Obviously, I think the voices you should be listening to are the survivors and the people who are sex workers who have come forward. But there's one, we do a program called Medical Advocacy. We accompany survivors at the hospital where they're getting a sexual assault forensic exam. And there is one that really sticks out to me, though this is pretty common. I was with an adult survivor who was drugged and raped violently by an acquaintance. She got her forensic exam and reported to law enforcement, and it all went relatively smoothly. I'm sitting with her in an exam room, waiting for prescriptions, when the officer burst back in and said, "Why didn't you tell me you had a prostitution charge?" She tried to explain that it was something she did in the past. It had nothing to do with this current assault that she was reporting. She didn't even think to mention it. But it was too late. Everything had changed in his eyes. She was now a liar, a criminal, less deserving of help, a bad victim, and he proceeded to interrogate her and dismiss her entire report. When he left, she was crying, and she told me, "I know I shouldn't have reported to the police. I don't know why. I tried to give it another chance. I know how they treat people like me, and I will never report again." And that is how you help a rapist. Rapists are in our society. They know who we marginalize. They know who we raise up. And when we criminalize people, when we don't support them, when we don't see them as credible, and criminalization leads to this, rapists know that too, and they target those people, and they get away with it. My agency also serves many survivors of human trafficking, and also many people that engage in consensual or survival sex. And sometimes these groups overlap Sometimes they don't. It's rare that either of these groups report trafficking or sexual harm or feel safe engaging with systems or even our advocacy services, and for very good reason. Most have experienced stigma, mistreatment, and legal repercussions for seeking help. Survivors are not going to seek help if it means risking their own freedom and safety, which makes our community less safe. So many times I've seen survivors of human trafficking used as pawns, coerced, and put in highly unsafe situations to try to capture a trafficker. And that, shuts down any future cooperation. I'm on the Crime Victims Reparation Boards, and I see survivors of rape.
30 seconds.
Thank you. And I see survivors of rape being denied assistance because they were engaged in consensual sex work at the time when they were attacked, and that's considered illegal activity, and that's a reason you can deny someone crime victims reparations. We know from years of research that financial abuse is a huge barrier to leaving an abusive relationship, and that certain factors predict if a woman will be killed or badly injured by her abusive partner. One of the biggest protective factors is women having access to financial resources, and that is something that consensual sex work can provide. On the flip side, having a criminal record greatly limits these employment opportunities and their ability to get away from abuse.
Thank you so much. Let's get to the opposition. We have first up Dr. Will Hall, Louisiana Baptist Office of Public Policy, and John Raymond, Bridge Radio. Oh, before we go to opposition, they had another 109 cards in support. These will be they will be in the record of the committee, but I'm not going to read all of the names. So 109 cards in support.
Thank you, committee. Mr. Chairman, thank you, committee members. I'll be brief. There are actually a lot of issues I wanted to raise with you today, but I'm just going to share one. And I work with a number of, in fact, two of the largest ministries in the state that deal with women who are rescued from human trafficking and children. One in New Orleans and one in Shreveport. And I will tell you that all the experts tell you that if you legalize prostitution, it is going to increase human trafficking. And in this state, we actually have some of the strictest laws. The attorneys general of the United States have said that as well, that we have some of the strictest laws against human trafficking, yet the I-20 corridor and I-10 corridor continue to plague us. And it's particularly a plague upon children. And for the last 4 years, we've seen children that have been rescued out of human trafficking from 200 to 400, 600 to 800, I think was the last number that I saw. I haven't seen the report for 2020. But before you legalize prostitution, I would ask that you would just pause and think about the law of unintended consequences. Understand the link between the prostitution as an industry and its ties to human trafficking. And please don't pass this bill. Thank you.
Good afternoon, distinguished representatives. My name is John Raymond. I'm the senior pastor of New Horizon Church in Slidell, headmaster of Lakeside Christian Academy, general manager of the Bridge Radio. I'm also an elected member of the Louisiana Republican State Central Committee and the St. Tammany Republican Parish Executive Committee. I'm speaking in opposition of House Bill 67. I realize that the people supporting these bills feel like they have the best interests of their constituents at heart. I'm not questioning anyone's motives, but rather the methods by which this bill is trying to achieve those objectives. One argument is that this bill protects sex between two consenting adults. If a man and a woman consent to have sex, they can certainly figure out a way to make that happen without exchanging money. What legal prostitution?
Hold on. We almost to the end.
What legal prostitution does is create a world where women and men sell their bodies to meet their financial needs. But legalizing commercial sex only creates greater financial problems and emotional scars. Prostitution does not empower women, it disempowers women. It makes them feel that they cannot have a respectable career that contributes to society. Prostitution is not a victimless crime. If prostitution becomes legal, do you think there will be fewer children born out of marriage or more? Fewer abortions or more? Do you think there will be less divorce or more? Less venereal disease and health problems? Less psychological and emotional problems? Less domestic violence, sexual abuse, and rape or more? How many husbands will be lured away from their wives by the convenience of a prostitute? How many marriages and problems will be ignored because of having physical needs met through commercial sex when the deeper emotional needs of the marriage go unaddressed? And then, of course, there's the issue of male prostitution and transgender prostitution. Prostitution is not a clean-cut business. Commercial sex work extends to every nuance of sexual perversion. This will open the door to unlimited public advertising with sex and perversion as the glamorous centerfold. And then we'll be scrambling to create more bills and pass more laws to solve these problems and the other systemic problems that proliferate because of our short-sighted decisions if we pass this bill today. Many of those in commercial sex work will resort to alcohol and drug addiction to ease the emotional pain that is created internally by knowing they have sold out their purity and their dignity. Legalizing sin never solves problems in the long run. We can say something is right all we want to, but in our hearts, we know it's wrong. God has put a design into place to make societies healthy and productive. People usually assume that since something is legal and allowed, then it must be morally right. The younger generation will look at our laws and they will be fooled into thinking that prostitution is fine. And we're opening the door for them to work or walk into a life of sin, naively thinking that there will not be extreme consequences for them in the future. How many high school students will aspire to a career in prostitution? Some here have testified to being third-generation prostitutes. This is a family business that is often passed down to children and grandchildren. One main argument is that they have the right to do it because it only affects them. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, the reason we're here today is to pass laws because the actions of one affects the actions of all. We make laws to protect society, not just the individuals. And the fallout reaches into every home, business, and tax dollar. The life of prostitution and the freedom to sin, make poor choices, will not bring people what they want, but in the end only makes things worse. Honorable representatives, I plead with you to make laws that will ultimately bring your voters what they truly want, which is self-dignity and a better quality of life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Diane Amos, Camille Thompson. Camille Thompson is not here. Joshua Clayton. Sherry Lockridge. You may proceed.
Hi. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Sherry Lockridge, and I'm the anti-human trafficking team leader for Covenant House in New Orleans. Covenant House is a youth shelter that serves over 900 youth overcoming homelessness and trafficking ages 22 and under each year. We are also the lead service provider for the Greater New Orleans Human Trafficking Task Force. The cruel realities for young people 16 to 22 caught up in the sex trade are hard for most people to imagine. But unfortunately, this stark reality is present every day at Covenant House. The bill being presented today legalizes prostitution, repealing laws related to prostitution. And as it is currently written, we cannot support this bill. We do strongly agree that people engaging in prostitution should not be criminalized, as this only creates additional barriers to often already marginalized populations. However, as a trafficking team leader that has provided direct care to hundreds of survivors of trafficking and a former resident of Covenant House and survivor, the repeal of laws under this bill, such as soliciting for prostitutes, inciting prostitution, promoting prostitution, and enticing persons into prostitution, are laws that have been used to protect our most vulnerable populations from traffickers who often prey on them and to bring justice to those who have already been victimized. Unlike the Hollywood movies, where we see only physical force used, human traffickers often first involve the recruitment of the victim by means of coercion and fraud, a period of grooming, so to speak. The repeal of these laws under House Bill 67 would be giving traffickers and recruiters for the trafficker, in essence, permission to incite and entice, in other words, coercion, which is the state and federal legal definition of human trafficking. The assumption that this bill would help decrease human trafficking, that traffickers wouldn't profit from fully decriminalized prostitution, hints that many today still don't fully understand what drives human trafficking: supply and demand. Repealing the law of purchasing sex, as written in this bill, would significantly increase the demand, as it did in other countries that legalized prostitution, such as Germany, driving traffickers to get more supply, placing more vulnerable men, women, and youth of the LGBTQAI+ at risk.
30 seconds.
We respectfully ask you today to say no to this bill that would place far too many youth and marginalized populations at risk of being the next victim of human trafficking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Diane Amos. I'm the director of Free NOLA, which is an anti-sex trafficking nonprofit. I am here to testify against the bill presenting legalizing prostitution. I have worked with women in the sex industry for over 12 years, visiting them in the strip clubs, rescuing them from their pimps, ministering to them, assisting them to escape the sex industries, and driving them across the state to receive restoration services. I know their names, I know their children and their families. I can honestly say that none of them ever visualized that they would be doing this type of work, selling their bodies over and over again. It's just not the vision they had for their lives. How can this be a little girl's dream? As a matter of fact, when one of these ladies prepares to dance or entice customers, they put on lots of makeup, hair, costumes, and a stage name. Her real identity is hidden and tucked away where it cannot be hurt. Many of these same women suffered sexual abuse from a family member, friend, clergy, or someone they trusted. That trauma and PTSD lasts a lifetime until they receive the proper counseling. They are masters at compartmentalizing their everyday life from the life of shame and guilt. Let's look at a couple models. As Cherie had said, let's look at Germany, for instance, which has had legal prostitution for a very long time. There are about 33,000 officially registered sex workers, though the government estimates the real number to be as high as 400,000. Many of these same women work under the supervision of a pimp. Some even work under the Hells Angels in cities like Hamburg and Frankfurt. Today, you can order a woman from a phone, find a drive-through sex outlet, or simply pick up a girl of your choice from the streets of Berlin. While this legislation introduced in 2002 aimed to improve conditions for sex workers, many of these people still live and work in poor conditions, or also victims of human trafficking or modern-day slavery. With new rights and privileges credited to prostitutes, the German government thought they would reduce, if not eliminate, human trafficking. However, many officials say the numbers have only increased. Let's look at the Nordic model. The Nordic model approach to prostitution, sometimes known as the sex buyer law or Swedish abolitionist or equality model, decriminalizes all those who are prostituted, provides support services to help them exit, and makes buying people for sex a criminal offense in order to reduce the demand that drives sex trafficking. This approach has now been adopted in Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Canada, France, Ireland, and most recently, Israel. The Nordic model was pioneered in Sweden
30 seconds.
By Cecile Hogard after extensive research. She wrote, "We spent several years doing field work and we developed close relationships with those prostituted women. We heard about their experiences of past abuse, extreme poverty, and violence. We were prepared for these stories because of our previous studies on outcasts and marginalized people. But what the pimp woman told us of their concrete experiences of prostitution was unexpected and shocking. They told us what it was like to have their bodies used as rental apartments for unknown men to invade, and how this made it necessary to separate their body from their self. Me and my body are two separate parts. It is not me, my feeling, or my soul. I am not for sale."
Thank you, ma'am. Next time. Thank you.
I just had a little more.
I know. I wish we had a little more time.
Okay.
Thank you. Glory Blankenship, Kathleen Benfield.
Let me go ahead.
Sure.
My name is Glory Blankenship, and I'm here on behalf of survivors and sex workers who could not make it. I'm here representing Purchase Not for Sale, a direct services provider in northwestern Louisiana, and we oppose House Bill 67 as it stands today. Our organization walks alongside those working in the sex industry by offering resources and relationships to workers and rescue and recovery for survivors. The majority of those we service have experienced or are currently experiencing exploitation at some level within the industry. As one sex worker told me Friday night, it's simply not possible to separate the sex industry from sex trafficking and the empowerment of some from the exploitation of others. Each day in my work, I see firsthand how the industry and the exploitation of the vulnerable overlap in complex ways that cause a tremendous amount of harm to our communities. Yet this bill would grant greater freedoms for institutions and individuals to further exploit vulnerable populations that we want to protect. The reasons behind these vulnerabilities and why exploiters seek those populations out are complex. The state of Louisiana's current system for protecting those within the sex industry is far from perfect and needs vast improvement. Our organization supports reducing incarceration rates and desires to see transformative change within the justice system, especially for sex workers. But greater justice for sex workers and survivors has to include holding those who would exploit them accountable and not granting them more freedoms. As a result of conversations with survivors and current sex workers, our organization must oppose HB 67 because it's a simple solution to what is a really, really complex problem. We know this bill is an attempt to push our state forward in the fight for true justice, and that those supporting it do so with a clear intention to prevent harm. But the data in places that have passed similar legislation demonstrates that full decriminalization will lead to an increase in sex trafficking, violence against workers, and exploitation. At Purchase Not for Sale, we've found innovative ways to provide trauma-informed restorative services to survivors, sex workers, pimps, buyers, and traffickers through community partnerships, collaborations with law enforcement, and a commitment to recognizing the complexities of justice within the industry. We wholeheartedly believe in this work. And that's why we're asking for a more complex, trauma-informed justice model that values survivors' voices, protects the vulnerable, holds exploiters accountable, and gives everyone access to restoration. It is possible. Last Friday night stood in a parking lot at 2:30 a.m. With a group of sex workers who asked me to come down here and say,
30 seconds.
Do better. We can get more creative, and we can create a more just bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee, and thank you so much for your patience today in hearing all of these stories. I'm sure, like you, my heart breaks for many of the stories that we've heard today. And even though I have different life experiences than many that have testified today, I still empathize with the stories, and I pray that everyone here who has experienced the trauma and the things that have been mentioned will have health and healing after these experiences. But I must oppose House Bill 67. And the biggest reason is that all of the testimony we've heard today has focused on the supply side. But you have heard nothing from the demand side. This bill decriminalizes every aspect of prostitution. If you look at the enumeration of the crimes that are being repealed, you'll see not just simply the selling of sex, but you will also see the purchasing of commercial sex. You will find soliciting for prostitution. That basically is, in parlance, pimping. You will find prostitution by massage. You will find letting premises for prostitution or enticing persons into prostitution. So what this bill does is it decriminalizes every aspect of commercial sexual activity, including purchasing, including enticing, and including brothels. Just let that sink in for a moment. I know our state has a lot of problems and we have people in dire circumstances, but do we want to become a destination for sex tourism? This has been tried in other places, including in Washington, D.C. And yet even there, they rejected the notion of decriminalizing prostitution. I certainly see the need where we have to be more compassionate for women who have found themselves believing that this is the way to earn a living, or because of trauma that they have experienced, having to or resorting to prostitution. But do we really want to decriminalize all the other aspects of prostitution that are mentioned and enumerated in this bill? Currently, the fines that are and the penalties that are paid by people purchasing sex or enticing other people to engage in commercial sexual activity, those fines are used to help people who are the victims of human trafficking and are the victims in prostitution cases. So once you take all of that away, you take away the penalties, then you're also going to be taking away much needed funds that are used to help people. So I believe this bill is not good. I believe it's a dangerous proposal. I believe that it sends a bad message to our children, as this is the way to elevate themselves out of poverty. And I pray that our state can offer more to our citizens than to engage or to purchase commercial sex. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Patrina Mosley, National Center on Sexual Exploitation, and Cartleen Messiah's World Without Exploitation.
Thank you for having me today. As the chairman stated, my name is Patrina Mosley with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. And I want to say that we at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, we love women. And we believe that the state of Louisiana loves women too. Those who find themselves in shame or frustration with the stigma of prostitution, this bill says that that's good enough for you. We say this is not good enough for you. We want a bill that actually communicates how much the state of Louisiana loves its women. As was stated before, this bill decriminalizes the full sex trade, nearly 11 different statutes: brothel owning, pimping, buying, promoting, enticing, soliciting. No one here is arguing that women who find themselves in desperate situations should be criminalized and treated like less than human. We don't want that, and I don't think Louisiana wants that. But what hasn't been hammered enough, as has been stated by the previous testimony, is the demand. Why is this such a lucrative business that women who find themselves in vulnerable positions know that they can make money off of this? Why? Although the stated goal of this bill is to lessen the amount of incarcerated people, in just 2 short pages, it becomes the most dangerous bill that it claims it wants to help the marginalized and those of color. This bill and others like it want to fully decriminalize the sex trade, but it's an affront to the dignity of women and a sinister grooming for our children. There are no studies in the world that show that greenlighting just about every aspect of the commercial sex trade is safer. In fact, the studies and survivor testimonies we do have from around the world that's tried this experiment with women's bodies show that commercial sex industry to be inherently violent and harmful. Legally enabling this deeply problematic industry will only succeed in increasing sex trafficking and inviting more organized crime throughout the state. In fact, prostitution and sex trafficking are intrinsically linked and operate the same way, as in recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, patronizing, enticing, soliciting, all of which HB 67 would see no problem with. Decriminalizing the sex trade does not make a distinction between those who are willing participants versus the vast majority who are being abused, forced, coerced, manipulated, groomed, and controlled with drugs to perform. Therefore, one cannot say they want to effectively combat sex trafficking while opening the floodgates for the commercial sex trade, which HB 67 will do. The realities of the sex trade are fueled by the exploitation of those who are most vulnerable, which are people of color, immigrants, unhoused, foster youth care, LGBTQ folks, women, children, those of histories with childhood sexual abuse. Traffickers and pimps, they prey on this. They can see it from a mile away. And they offer promises of meeting some type of need, whether it be economical, emotional, or both.
30 seconds.
If Louisiana passes this bill, it will condone abuses to feed upon the needs and vulnerabilities of your community. And According to the Louisiana Department of Children and Family Services, commercial sexual exploitation reported that already 44% of human trafficking survivors in Louisiana were black girls, when black girls only make up 19% of the population in your state. In a 2-year review of all suspected human trafficking incidents across the country, 94% of sex trafficking victims are female, and mostly black and Latina. In a 2012 study of men who buy sex, researchers found that 85% of buyers were white men. These are two imbalances that we are confronted with the commercial sex trade: the need for black and brown women's bodies and the demand from white males. What HB 67 will do is say hell to the patriarchy, that people who have suffered childhood sexual abuse
That's time, ma'am. Sorry. Thank
are
you.
worthy of this, and they are
Ma'am,
not.
that's
Thank you.
time.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Caitlin Macias, and I am with World Without Exploitation. We are a national organization dedicated to combating human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Before I begin my testimony, I want to respond to a few things that we've heard today. My organization, World We, has had over 200 organizations sign on to a petition. All 200 anti-trafficking organizations are part of World We. We do not believe anyone exploited or who identifies as a sex worker should never be arrested. But what we know is that the sex trade is inherently harmful and dangerous. You can look at Rhode Island, which attempted to decriminalize the sex trade, to find that law enforcement stated that they could not go after child traffickers. Nevada, which is the only state with a legal sex trade, has over 60% more illegal exploitation. We know that decriminalizing third-party exploiters and sex buyers does not work. We know that HB 67 is a dangerous bill that legitimizes exploitation. The other thing is that the legislation is framed as an effort to support and protect sex workers, but it does much more. In fact, the bill repeals several key provisions that prevent exploitation, including pimping, purchasing sex, and brothel operating. Though people are claiming it doesn't impact trafficking, repealing statutes like promoting prostitution and enticing someone into prostitution do not impact trafficking, because these function as lesser penalties for trafficking. Since trafficking prosecutions are notoriously difficult to bring and re-traumatizing for survivors, many child traffickers are prosecuted under the lesser offenses. In addition, by repealing the solicitation statute, you're not only expanding the commercial sex market by inviting more men in as new clients and sex tourists, which increases trafficking, but you're also removing a key revenue stream for trafficking survivors. Under the current law, the purchase of commercial sex activity has a provision mandating that fines levied against sex buyers, a notoriously privileged group of predominantly men, is to be paid to a program for victim services that counsels, treats, and helps victims of human trafficking, or those who are charged or convicted of prostitution. So, this bill does impact and harm trafficking survivors. I speak today to oppose Louisiana House Bill 67 to fully decriminalize the sex trade in Louisiana, including pimping, brothel operating and owning, and sex buying. This bill and the ideology it represents demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the sex trade and minimizes the lived experience of survivors. Furthermore, it's beyond reckless to adopt a policy that encourages the sex industry to grow during a global pandemic like COVID-19. Lastly, we hope that you will consider the harms to children, especially children from marginalized
30
communities,
seconds.
by allowing sex buying and pimping to flourish undeterred. Sex trafficking survivors were not meaningfully consulted in the crafting of this legislation. Did you know that? In reality, what we're talking about today is not debating whether people in prostitution should be decriminalized. What we are arguing today is whether pimping, brothels, and sex buying should be decriminalized.
That's time, ma'am. Thank you. Natasha Goon, well, I'm sorry. Natasha, are you here with Her Resiliency Center?
Hello, it's Natasha Gwines.
Gwines, sorry.
No worries.
Welcome.
I have prepared a written statement that I plan to read based on the level of trauma and impact that it had on me. So, I want to first start by thanking the committee for providing a space for this difficult conversation on the topic of decriminalization of sex work in your state and my home state, Louisiana.
My name is Natasha Gwines, and I am the founder and president of Her Resiliency Center. At Her, we support young women overcoming various forms of hardships and barriers to having a thriving future. Today, as I'm here as an organizational leader, survivor, and advocate against HB 67. Truthfully, it was not easy to put my words on this paper or even get on the plane last night to travel here. The brutal childhood abuse, neglect, and overall trauma that I still carry in my body happened here in Louisiana. Like so many of the young women we serve, I endured a great deal of brutal abuse. For me, it was at the hands of my drug addict father. There was no protection as my mom left me and my little sister with our dad after he refused to pay child support, saying that she couldn't afford us. The level of poverty we grew up in, characterized by such things such as taking cold baths and being known as the smelly kids in elementary school, is the reason that this brutality we endured went unnoticed by identified protectors, such as teachers and principals. Like me and the women we serve, I wanted as far away from that life. And for me, it was like running towards my dream in Washington, D.C. After a short period of time of being there, I realized I had no way to make any money, and I opened a phone. I had a neighbor who suggested sex work and my ability to entertain men. Together, we sat down with the phone book because it was 2001, and we called a number of phone numbers. The only one to answer that day was Deborah Jean Palfrey, now known as the DC Madam. At 20 years old, with no means to care for myself, I began selling my body to 3 strangers a night. Years later, after doing a lot of work on myself, I now support women who find themselves in the exact predicament that I was once in, without options. And through my own therapy, substance use recovery of 19 years, and working with other young women, I've come to recognize that the DC Madam was a sex trafficker. She would meet the legal definition of a sex trafficker, which I'm sure you've heard today, by the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And for me and the DC Madam, it was her constant and ongoing coercion, which she used to ensure her profit. This next part I must share is what ensured that I got on my flight last night.
30 seconds, ma'am.
It is well known that Senator David Vitter, a former Louisiana state representative and a United States senator, was a client of the DC Madam. I cannot be here today and say that David Vitter bought sex with me. I can't because of the legal implications and because during that time I spent a good deal of my life self-medicating with crack and whiskey. But it can go on the record that he was a client of the DC Madam, for which used a great deal of coercion to keep me going. With all due respect, can any of you tell the difference between sex work and sex trafficking? I couldn't tell the difference, and I lived it. Nor can many of the young women we serve every day.
Ma'am, that's time. I'm sorry.
I need to say one more.
I know, ma'am. That's time.
I traveled here. I missed my flight. I need to say one.
Ma'am, I understand you travel here. There are a lot of people that travel here. There are a lot of people traveled here for other bills on the agenda. Your time, ma'am. I turned the microphone off. Your time has elapsed. Everyone else that traveled has. You actually went 3 minutes and 45 seconds. You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Representative Landry, to close on your bill, we also have 17 red cards, several from DAs across the state and the Sheriff's Association. We're not going to read them all, just like I didn't read all of the ones in support. Your mic is back on.
Back on. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, today. This actually, I think, went well. It was very respectful. It was very polite, especially for those of you who stayed for most of the testimony. I am extremely proud of the coalition who came here today to speak in favor of this, and just want to reiterate that this bill is their bill. They asked me to do this. I worked with them hard on this, that the people who spoke in support actually know what they're talking about. work with people this will affect, have lived these lives, and have real experience on this. I want to also reiterate, I understand that some people don't understand the difference between legalize and decriminalize, but I know that this committee does because y'all have talked about it at length. Decriminalize solely means to stop arresting people who engage in sex work. Finally, trafficking, the word that has been used a lot here this week. Trafficking is illegal. It is illegal federally. It is illegal on a state level. It remains illegal. Any non-consensual sexual behavior in this state is a crime. I thank you all for listening here today. I think the testimony was very compelling. And again, this is the first state in the country to have a bill presented like this. And I think y'all did well today. And I appreciate it. And I think our entire House of Representatives should listen to this bill as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Landry. Representative Bryant.
Quick discussion.
Oh, sure.
Is this it's a felony or misdemeanor in its current posture, this crime, and what is the penalty?
I think it depends. Do you want the statute number?
Yes.
It's in the bill, but
do you know what
I think the first offense at least is a misdemeanor. Is that correct?
Right.
And then I think future convictions rise to the level of a felony.
Is the issue that a woman that is having a encounter with a gentleman or another woman for money, if that person becomes rude or abusive and get into the situation where it may become a rape, that person doesn't feel comfortable calling law enforcement for fear of being charged with prostitution?
Yes, correct. And just real quick, there are men and women who engage in sex work. But yeah, that's the problem, is if, as many of these people spoke, when they go to the hospital or go to cops, they're not taken seriously, in part because the behavior is a crime. And I don't want to speak for other people, but from what some people have told me personally, they've experienced a lot of violence at the hands of law enforcement themselves.
Okay, so is the move to try to maybe create some kind of Good Samaritan law or some kind of immunity that women who are victims or being victimized of sex trafficking has an outlet?
I'm not
does that
aware
help
of that.
fix the problem? Because it doesn't seem like a misdemeanor violation is the serious problems, and that's not what people are not being incarcerated for misdemeanors if we push forward with the things we're doing now for misdemeanor violations. So the real deal, it seems like we need to be protecting women who are being raped and victimized by men who are trying to take advantage of them only because they know they have no outlet, right?
I think that's part of the issue. Overall, because this is defined as a criminal activity,
right.
the exposure to arrest, the need to go underground, the fear of going to an emergency room or even law enforcement. I get what you're saying, I think, about a Good Samaritan issue. I don't think that has been proposed. I'm not aware of it. It's certainly something we can explore in the interim.
Can we work on that? Because the idea of women being okay to sell their body and do this in the homes of minor kids, or do this without having to show some kind of health certificate or anything else, because now it's legal with no restrictions, seems like it could be very unhealthy and problematic for us to go forward and legalize that and make that okay. But protecting women from being victims of assault and rape and being, I guess, induced with drugs or somebody doing those different things, I think we should be in the business of protecting women from that. So I hope that, I don't know where this bill is going. I'm going to vote for it, but I hope that you work on the things that are really, really need to be addressed, and that is protecting women from being victims of rape and different things only because they're participating in, I don't want to say the P word. What's the other word?
Sex work.
Sex work.
Thanks, Marcus.
Okay.
I appreciate those comments, and I think there is a lot of work that can be done and options, and just to your first point about children in the home, there are a lot of things that happen in people's homes, legal, illegal. I mean, parents having a relationship, or a mother or father and boyfriend or girlfriend. I mean, those are things that are outside the purview of law enforcement currently. Certainly, we hope that any children who are the victims of any sort of abuse or see their parents doing anything harmful to themselves or others would hopefully come to the attention of a trusted adult. I don't see this as any worse, I guess you would say, than what currently may happen.
No, this is definitely worse. For any parent or any person that was a child to see your father or your mother with a person that you know is not your family member, and a person that you know is not your dad or your mom, is traumatic in itself. No child wants their parent around anybody of the opposite sex going into a closed room and closing the door. My kids with their own mom don't want me locking the door. So that is a traumatic experience, and that does sit with a kid for a long period of time when you see your child or your mom or dad with somebody of the opposite sex going into a locked room or door where they can't have access to that parent. That in itself is trauma. Okay. I'm sorry.
Thanks. I don't know what to say to that.
You
Thank
don't
you.
have to
But
say
thank you for
anything.
your intentions.
Yeah, thank you. Representative Marino.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for bringing the bill forward, to bring the issue forward in the legislature. I'm sure you know that a lot of ideas sometimes take more than 1 year to advance, but just having the discussion and a debate is good. I want to let people know that, you know, me stepping out of the room as many times as I did has more to do with 3 bills on the floor and 1 bill in a committee next door that I had to go to. But I appreciate you bringing this to the table.
And thank you for pointing that out, that often change, as Rep. Nelson and others in here know, takes a long time. I mean, other members in this building have, for example, brought marijuana bills for years and years. And I think this is the year to do it. And so with this bill as well, with sex work, this is the first time that we've been able to educate y'all on this. And I know people have a lot of questions, overall from this bill, but I'm glad to have the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Marcel.
Thank you, Representative Landry, for your work. I will say that I've been out of the room for much of the discussion, which I apologize for, but I had another bill and another meeting. And so I missed much of the testimony, most of it, which I really wanted to hear. I had not made a decision prior to coming into this room whether I would support or not support your bill. So much of what the action that I was going to take was based upon, I was going to weigh the testimonies of everyone here. I do like the idea of decriminalizing something, but I'm sure there are other components that you could work on as well. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that I don't take walks on bills. I don't dodge things that are tough. That's why I came back to sit in the seat. But thank you for bringing the bill.
I appreciate your support.
Thank you, Representative Landry, and thank you all to everyone who came to testify on both sides. 109 cars. That's a lot of organizing and a lot of commitment, and the folks that were in opposition. Members, is there a motion? And Representative Bryant.
Make a motion to continue discussion on this bill. Yes.
Okay, so he moves to report the bill favorable. Is there objection? Multiple objections. Madam Secretary, please call the roll. I'm sorry, I'll recognize Vice Chair.
Mr. Chair, make a substitute motion to involuntarily defer.
We have to vote on the motion to involuntarily defer. As chairman, never mind. I'm not going to say that. Let's vote on the motion. Hold on. Let me say this. The motion, Representative Bryant made a motion to report favorable. Representative Barakat has made a substitute motion to report to defer, involuntarily defer. Let me step in. I'm going to make a substitute motion to voluntarily defer because I don't want to involuntarily. I can't do a substitute to a substitute. Okay. Let me confer with my counsel. Go ahead, Representative Barakat.
I think the approval of the author. So if the author will agree to the motion to voluntarily defer, I will change to voluntarily defer.
Yes, Representative Bryant.
If can I withdraw my motion to go forward?
Hold on. This is a conversation. Listen, ma'am, you guys talked for 2.5 hours and nobody was disrespectful to you. So I'm ask that you be just as respectful as the folks were to you. I'm gonna ask that one of the folks that have the authority remove you, and let me have a conversation with the members of the committee that sat through the 3 hours of testimony on this matter. Okay, thank you.
Never mind.
Let me let Attorney Riley discuss this.
First of all, you had your motion to remove favorable. He made a substitute motion. You have to dispense with the substitute motion. If you want to withdraw his motion to move favorable, he can do that. I mean, you can withdraw.
If it's involuntary deferred, then it just goes away permanently, and we don't have any tool to have a further discussion on this bill this session. Correct? If it's involuntary deferred, right?
That's correct.
So
even if it's not involuntarily deferred, based on our calendar, we're not going through another 3-hour debate this session.
All right. Well, let's just keep going. I'll keep my motion in place, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So that we have to go with the substitute motion first.
But it would be,
unless hold on, Representative Landry, this is your bill. What would I think you
Where
could?
are we now?
I think you understand what's about to happen with the bill. So do you want to voluntarily defer or would you like to vote on the motion to involuntarily defer?
I tried to discuss this earlier with the advocates and explain briefly what happened, and they will leave this to me. I would ask to voluntarily defer it for the sole reason that I think there is a chance we may want to ask for a study resolution, and I feel like the committee will be more open to that if that happens.
Okay, and I will ask Mr. Vice Chair if you would withdraw your substitute motion, and I'll make the motion to voluntarily defer.
Fine.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bryant. Thank you, Representative Landry. And again, thank you, everyone that came today. I'm going to make a motion that we voluntarily defer House Bill 67. Is there any objection? Hearing none, House Bill 67 has been voluntarily deferred.